Hi, welcome to our latest bonus chat. This is from our pod recording looking back over Leinster v Claremont. If you missed it, you'll find it on Apple, Spotify, and all the other usual places. Now, last week, after relying heavily on a strong bench to secure a bonus point win in Bristol, Leo Cullen said this in his post-match presser. Yes, we were able to bring a few players from overseas, but we're so constrained in what we can actually bring in, so we spend out a hell of a lot of time trying to develop what we have in our own backyard. It was not surprisingly, a particular corner of the online rugby took exception to his use of the word constrained and got a lot of mileage out of it throughout the week. So I reckon for this week's bonus chat, I'd ask my panel to introduce maybe a Leinster fan's perspective of the discussion, starting with yourself, David.
Yeah, well, I think when Cullen says that, obviously it's going to cause some ripples out there, notably from certain places in Ireland, but even the French seem to take issue with it, which is ironic considering their own financial positions. I mean, if you're talking in terms of constraints, as with every other province, the other three provinces in Ireland, Leinster are limited in the number of NIQs they can sign. I think the limit at this point is still three, which is not a lot of players. At the moment, I think part of the condition of bringing in R.A. Snyman was that his minutes would be limited. Certainly his starting minutes, I think, in Europe would be limited. And I think, a lot is being made of it this year because Leinster brought in R.A. Snyman and they brought in Jody Barrett. Worth noting that they only brought Barrett in halfway through the season. But previous to this year, going back as far as the last time Leinster won the Champions Cup, you can't really point to a large marquee player that they brought in. They've signed players every year, but I mean, no one was losing their minds when Joe Tamane was playing for Leinster or when Jason Jenkins made the trip up from Limerick. So I do think there's a bit of very, very, very recency bias on that front. Leinster definitely benefit from the central contract system here in Ireland, but reason they benefit from that is because they develop the most international players. The system isn't designed to benefit Leinster. It's designed to keep the best players in Ireland, and those players are coming out of Leinster. Reasonable argument could be made that Leinster has the largest population, although in that terms, Ulster is not much further behind, and certainly the side of Ulster that rugby players tend to come from wouldn't have the same strains put on it that Dublin would in terms of Gaelic football. So really, Leinster's super strength is that the very strong club system and the very strong school system. But beyond that, it is a system that develops most of the players that play in its match day 23s, and then has to contend with the fact that a lot of those players are gone or injured because of international duty on a regular basis. So when he says they're constrained, they follow the same rules that every other province in Ireland does. They benefit from the fact that every so often they get to play in the Aviva, but even this year, that's only because the RDS is under construction. We don't own our own stadium like Munster down the south. Um, so we yes, are there advantages? There are, but I think the idea that Leinster don't have constraints on them, particularly when you compare them to the large French sides. Toulouse don't have to go to David Nucifora or David Humphreys every time they want to sign a tight head prop or a lock. Leinster do, Munster do, Connacht do, Ulster do, and I think that the same rules generally tend to apply. Do Leinster have a slightly bigger wage bill? They do, but that never stopped Ulster signing Stephen Kitsoff. It didn't stop Munster signing Ari Simon and Damien Diolande. I would have a lot of sympathy for Connacht if they came out and were a little bit miffed about the whole situation, but I think everyone else is protesting a little bit too much.
Yeah, I mean, uh, I can see the way there was the reaction because I mean, there's an existing narrative out there, and this is just what I want to push back on against in terms of the narratives that are out there that Leinster get everything and nobody else gets anything. It's put so simplistically out there that's why there's such a so in these echo chambers online that I'm always willing to have a conversation about it if there's any kind of perceived maybe disparity going one way or another. But you hit the nail on the head. There's the realities for Leinster. And what Leo was trying to do there was say that the point he was trying to make was, well, yeah, we were able to bring on Jordy Barrett, but have you seen all the players that we produced ourselves? I mean, that bench that came off in Bristol, there was Andrew Porter and Caelan Doris coming off that bench as well. It wasn't just Barrett and Barrett and Snyman. So it was a little bit simplistic to say that it's like, oh, Leinster's just having everything handed to them, because it's just not the case. And you can't compare you can't compare it to the French system because it's a different structure. completely
Yeah.
different structure. If they want a player, they've got to get a checkbook out, and they've got a salary cap as well, which is an ever expanding salary cap to consider. So it's a different way of looking at it. And the NIQ restrictions, I know I have friends of mine who don't like, would rather we didn't have any NIQs, and and the Irish players always get precedence, and that's ideal as well. But if you don't take any NIQs, they go to the French and the English sides, and they get the benefits of them because those players are available. Those players looking for sabbaticals from New Zealand, South Africa, and stuff like that. I mean, they're going to go somewhere, and there are benefits to having them in the Irish setup in the camps, and the younger players playing around them and stuff. So there's benefits all around. What do you think, Connor?
Yeah, just to pick up on a couple of things that David has said, um, I don't think it's necessarily that comment that causes the ripples because Leo Cullen said it. I think there are people who are actively looking to take anything that, be it Leo Cullen or somebody else who is Leinster based, and say, wow, how can we take this out of context so that we can be offended? Um, and nobody's trying to offend anyone. Nobody's trying to say that Munster are not constrained or Ulster are not constrained. We are all working within the same systems. And as you've said, the point that's being made is that we have these constraints on us. And so we found workarounds. We have found ways to say, all right, we can't sign to international tight head props. So how are we going to make Thomas Clarkson good enough that if a couple of injuries happen, he can take the step up to being in the Ireland squad? How are we going to focus on the players we have and make them good enough to be this standard? And sometimes part of that is bringing in a player who improves your ability and improves your game or improves your mindset. I think a lot of Leinster fans will look at the players we've signed over the years. Would Sean O'Brien been as good as he was if he hadn't had Rocky Elsom to model himself off? May that only be in rugby terms, please and thank you. Would there be a lot of players who had the mental capacity to do what they did over years without somebody like Isan Asewa having been there? Even he comes back to Leinster as a mental skills coach, and or sorry, he went to the Blues as a mental skills coach, sorry, and then came back to Leinster as a player. But that capacity to focus on things, to adapt that next job mentality that so often works well for Leinster is a great benefit of having someone like Isan Asewa to have been there. Is any player struggling because we happen to have, who's missing out because Ravis Slimani is there? Who's missing out because Slime is there? Who's missing out because Jordy Barrett is there? Nobody. Nobody is missing out on minutes. Nobody is missing out on opportunity. Everyone's benefiting from that in the same way that every other club who has signed an international player is taking a benefit from that. We're constrained in the ability to sign any more, but what we're not constrained in is the ability to produce more, and we are producing incredibly well and doing a really bloody good job of it. And I think anyone who begrudges that and anyone who's going to go looking to milk a misquoted or certainly an out of context quote and use that to say, aren't we the poor unfortunates? It's clickbait. That's all it is. And even again, just to tie in something David said, the benefits of playing in the Aviva. We rent the Aviva. Leinster don't own the Aviva. The IRFU and the FAI own the Aviva. Leinster pay rent for the privilege of playing there. And who gets the benefit of that rent? Because the IRFU are not just turning around and saying, Leinster gave us £250,000 to use the Aviva. Here you are, Leinster, have it back. Everybody benefits. Every time the Aviva is used, every club benefits. Every club benefits from what Leinster produce. So don't come to me with your poor me and our club are constrained too. Yes, you are. And what are you doing about that? What are you doing to make it better? I think the fact that one of the other provinces has taken a good look at the AIL and said, geez, we need a couple of players in a couple of positions. Let's offer a short-term contract to that fella, and let's bring this fella up through the system and see if we can make something of him as a player. Brilliant. I am delighted. I'm delighted to see a club looking internally and saying, if we cannot do that, if we too are constrained, how do we work the system to get something positive out of that? So, yeah, everyone's constrained, but the quote is storm in a teacup stuff and totally out of context. Let's everybody move on, please and thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like what you say about these narrative creators and nurturers online. I mean, it's deliberately misconstruing. Like, for example, if we go online and say, oh, Sam Prendergast played well on Saturday against Claremont, that's what we're saying because we watched the game and we thought he played well. But there's a lot of people who are saying, oh, well, that means he should be in the Ireland team ahead of somebody else. That's that, you know, they see they extract a subtext that wasn't even necessarily there, you know.
We're looking at a Leinster centric thing in this situation of saying, as an example, Sam Prendergast played well for Leinster this weekend.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, nobody, we're not saying anyone else didn't play well or did play well. We're not talking about an Ireland setup. We're talking about the fact that the starting out half demonstrated positive attributes in his position in that game. It makes no decisions for anything else. He's not a Lions bolter. He's not going to take somebody else's jersey from them. You know, it's one game.
Yeah. And also in those narrative pushers, I seem to remember when we announced that we were signing Slimani, there were definitely comments out there, well, this is going to hold back Clarkson, right? There were actually people who were saying that. And what's happened, he's actually gotten Ireland caps and done well with them. And I think he's if Tadhg Furlong isn't available, I think he's the right person to start for Leinster. Perfect, you know, personally with Slimani coming off the bench, I think that's the perfect balance for Leinster. So it's worked well for him, and like you say, he gets the benefit of working with them as well. But anyway, listen, we could talk about that for hours, but we're going to leave it there. Many thanks, lads, to Connor and David for joining me this week. Hope to have you on again soon. Thanks, lads.
Cheers, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.